Bowling Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Oh, a little quick on the trigger finger there. Excuse me. Let's get rolling here the right way. Beautiful day again so far. It's supposed to be cloudy today, but beautiful outside of our windows here on Jennifer Street. And I don't know about you, but I like listening to smart people. I'd like to believe you're listening to me now because you think I'm smart, but, maybe not. But I know that there are people that I like to watch on TV and listen to on the radio and listen to in appearances that are smart, and I really am impressed by them. And what I watched last night on YouTube, and I'm going to play for you in the next hour, some of it, was a conversation that was done at the Economic Club of D.C. with David Rubenstein and Cal Ripken Jr. About the Orioles, the vision for the Orioles, and just the way that they articulate things. It's just amazing. And the bad blood that existed with the previous ownership of Peter Angelos, who did everything he could to keep baseball out of Washington for all those years, and famously said, "There's no real baseball fans in Washington. That's a fiction." Blah, 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 blah. And he did what he could, but ultimately we got a team here, and it's now been 20 years, and it's been great. We got a World Series. I got a team back up on the rise now as they had to gut things, but some young players are starting to perform. They had a rare 1-0 win last night, and between the two cities, the attendance is about 4 million people. And while the Orioles at one time drew as many as 3.7 million, I think it was before they got to Camden Yards, or maybe it was the first couple of years of Camden Yards when we didn't have a team here, and the big attraction was the stadium. The team was pretty good, but it was the stadium. It was the new ballpark that was the model for ballparks to come. And so we're now in a period of time where the baseball loyalties are split because the Orioles heavily marketed to D.C. at that time. They had an office downtown where you could buy tickets and memorabilia. And the Washington Post had a beat writer for the Orioles. It was the local team. And so now we coexist with the Orioles, but Rubenstein is so smart, and the way he talks about the way the Orioles are a treasure to the city of Baltimore, how important they are to the city of Baltimore, and allows for, the idea that Washington should be successful as well and should have a team. It's going to be interesting next week. They hook up for a couple of games, Battle of the Beltways. It's more intriguing than it's been in years because the Nats are now pretty good again, and the Orioles are really good. They're coming off a 101-win season, and they're tied for first place with the Yankees as they wrap up the series this afternoon. So I'm going to play a lot of the things that were said by Cal and David Rubenstein. And also, you may not have heard this story, and I had not heard it until I watched it on YouTube last night. Cal Ripken had a no-trade clause in his contract, but how it came about was really kind of remarkable, and what he said about the decision he made at that time and what he would have done today, wow. I mean, how the course of history might have changed. So we got that coming up in the 10 o'clock hour. And then also we'll talk, of course, what we do every day about the quarterback, Jaden Daniels. And Chase Daniel, who was actually signed by the Redskins in what year was that? I forget the year. But anyway, he was caught on with the Saints and was on a Saints Super Bowl champion team, didn't play, but bounced around the NFL for a long time. And now he analyzes quarterbacks on tape. And what he said about Jaden Daniels, we'll get to that in about 20 minutes. But I want to start here with analysts who are really good at what they do and don't really care about what they say because they have nothing to worry about. It's not like they're trying to protect their jobs. And one of the biggest, if not the biggest, Oriole legend, we can debate whether it's Cal or whether it's Brooks, but certainly Jim Palmer is in the conversation. Hall of Fame pitcher, and he's been a broadcaster for the team for all these years. He's kind of like what Sonny has been to Washington football in many ways. Sonny didn't win like Palmer did. Palmer won 3 World Series in 3 different decades. But Sonny stayed with the team as a broadcaster, and so has Jim Palmer, and he's been exposed to many generations of Oriole fans. And when Palmer analyzes a game, he doesn't worry about, what his bosses think of what he says. If he knows he couldn't get fired, and he wouldn't get fired because he's so damn good. So the other night, the Orioles are beating the Yankees. This is the Tuesday night game where they're beating the Yankees 4-2. And Gunnar Henderson gets called out on strikes on a pitch that was clearly outside the strike zone, way low beyond anybody's eyes that would look at that and say, "Oh, of course, that's a ball. That's not strike three." But C.B. Buckner called it strike three, and Jim Palmer didn't care what he said. He unleashed this on C.B. Buckner.
Henderson coming off a leadoff home run yesterday in an 0-2 hole quickly. Cortez drops the arm angle down. And here you go. C.B. Buckner strike zone, full effect.
Well, you kind of wonder how bad he's going to be, and he's shown us already in the first inning. This ball's a grounder. And, all you want is a guy that understands what the strike zone. That's on the ground. Shouldn't be umpiring, and he is. And they know it. Been around a long time doesn't mean it's kind of like pitching. When I couldn't get people out, I became a broadcaster.
So CB will be joining us in the booth tomorrow.
Yeah, well, you are what you are.
Yeah, according to umpire scorecards, Buckner's 91.6 accuracy on pitches called is tied for the lowest in baseball this season among umpires who worked at least 5 games. He's been highly thought of in the past. He's worked 5 postseasons, 2 All-Star games. He's been an umpire since 1996. But that's Jim Palmer saying he shouldn't be an umpire anymore. And Angel Hernandez is another one who should not be an umpire anymore. And we've seen some massive changes in baseball for the good in recent years. Well, at least most of them. You can debate whether a runner on second base in extra innings, an automatic runner, is a good thing or not. But they've got the games now to a reasonable length. They're about 2 hours and 20 minutes to 2 hours and 45 for 9 innings in most cases. And the game is better. It's more watchable now. It's a much more watchable sport. And we have the technology now to have umpires who call balls and strikes the same way we have line calls in tennis. It can be done very easily, and it's got to happen. Because it just doesn't make sense when you have the technology to get it right and you're relying on the human eye. You can say, well, that's the way baseball's always been, and arguing with the umpire is part of the game. Okay, it was, but the game has been passed by other sports, which are killing them in the ratings. Again, women's basketball. It wasn't just this year where you had, 18 million people watching the final. The year before we had close to 10. Baseball's drawing 9.1 million people to watch World Series. So Palmer's 100% right. He shouldn't be an umpire, nor do they really need home plate umpires anymore. They're just – and I think we could probably get to the technology point where everything is called by cameras. Why not? Speed up the game because, they have to put on the headphones and look at the replay. They've gotten it down so it's not as cumbersome as it used to be. But this is ridiculous. Anybody watching that ball, which was called a strike, anybody watching it would know that's a ball. It's a ball. Of course it's a ball. It's way low. It's almost hit the dirt. But he called it a strike, and, if you argue, you're thrown out of the game, so Gunnar Henderson wasn't going to do that. But all credit to Palmer for doing what he does so well and, frankly, doesn't care what anybody thinks about it. That brings us to Charles Barkley. And I'll get to his interesting circumstance here in a moment. But they were doing the games last night, both of them blowouts in both Dallas blowing out the Clippers, and then in the early game, the Celtics knocking out Miami in 5 games. That was like a 37-point game, something like that. The other one was 30. And so Barkley, I don't know whether this was halftime or the pregame, but he was talking about the Suns, who are coached by Frank Vogel, and the Lakers, who are coached by Darvin Ham, and the reports that both of them are on the hot seat. This was Barkley not attacking NBA players necessarily, not attacking coaches, attacking the people who suggest that these coaches are on the hot seat.
Part of our job, we watch all the games and we watch all the talk shows. You know, a lot of these people on television, they're cowards because they want the players to like them. They don't want to do their job, which is to tell the truth. And I just want to say this about coaching. Anybody who thinks the reason the Lakers suck is because of Darvin Ham or the reason the Suns suck is because of Frank Vogel, you don't know what you're talking about. Frank Vogel is a hell of a coach. Darvin Ham is a hell of a coach trying to get his career started. But for all you punks, idiots, and jackasses on other networks who want to be media and who want all the players to like y'all, do your damn job. The Lakers suck and the Suns suck because of the players. Has nothing to do with the coaches. I feel better now.
Here, I can tell. Looks like you getting that off your chest.
I did. I hate it, man. You sit there like
Darvin
Darvin Ham needs to get fired. Frank Vogel needs to get fired. Who put them teams together? Them trash-ass teams put together need to get fired. Them guys, they didn't just all of a sudden suck as coaches. People who put them teams together they start packing up their stuff.
Barkley's in an interesting circumstance. I don't know how closely you've been following this, but NBC Universal is reportedly going to make a bid of $2.5 billion for the NBA rights, which would remove them from TNT. And TNT has been paying an average of about $1.2 billion a year, so they're going to double that. But NBC can use it for primetime programming on the network. They can also use it on Peacock, other streaming outlets that they own, and they figure that's a lot of money, but they can make it up in the way that Amazon has been monetizing what they paid to the NFL for the Thursday night games and playoff game and all that. And this has been now 40 years that this company has been televising the NBA. It started in 1984 on TBS and then moved to TNT 3 years later when they have games simultaneously. They televise them on each of the networks. And so what we'll have is Disney, which already is paying like $2.6 billion to put the games on ABC and ESPN. And then it looks like Peacock or Universal or whatever it's called, NBC related, that they would carry 2 primetime games a week, which, you know, they can't match on Turner because they're not a network. It's not. I think there's still some meaning in an over-the-air network and a cable channel, although it's indistinguishable for most of us. There still is some value in that. And they think that this can also be spun off some to Amazon, which they would get perhaps the conference finals and other things. And so that's the way things are going to work going forward with the NBA, which brings us to what happens to the greatest studio show of all time. They're in the Hall of Fame. You know, they were inducted as a group into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Charles Barkley, Ernie, Shaq, Kenny, those guys, I mean, they're legendary in how good they are. And according to a report, Barkley has an out in his contract that if they lose the rights to the NBA, he's a free agent. Well, if Barkley's a free agent and you heard what he just said and what he does on a nightly basis, he's going to be in demand from everybody. And so I would think ESPN would go all out to get him. Now, can they make enough money for whatever they have to pay him off the other things he would do? I would think so. I would think that, you know, having him as like a regular guest on their various NBA shows. I know that, you know, his great friendship with Mike Wilbon. He comes on once in a while. He come on all the time on PTI. I think it would make a lot of sense for them. I think that would be the place that I would think he would land. But, you know, NBC might want to establish something too, and they may want to take the whole crew with them to help to build up their program. But you know, it's chemistry that is hard to recreate. It started just with Ernie and Kenny, and then Barkley came on, and then Shaq joined them, and it's been an unbelievably successful show. But if Barkley is now a free agent, if that comes to an end with the likelihood, it seems like, you know, if their bid was $1.2 million, if Warner Brothers isn't going to be in the NBA business anymore, then you would think that Shaq is going to wind up on Shaq and Kenny and Barkley with Ernie, probably with Ernie. I wouldn't mess with that because he's great at what he does. they would move that way. Let me hit the Brittany Griner story real quickly here. You probably heard about this. She did an interview with Robin Roberts, which aired last night on ABC's 2020. She's got a book out called Coming Home, which is going to be released on Monday, and it talks about what she went through after being detained. Detained, what a word that is. Detained at a Moscow airport when a search of her luggage revealed vape cartridges allegedly containing oil derived from cannabis. And she said that she had made a mistake with her luggage. She didn't realize that she put it in there. And then she was detained. And in the early days, as she told Robin Roberts, had thoughts of suicide.
You've just been told you're going to be 9 years in a penal colony, one of the worst prisons in Russia.
I was just so scared for everything because there's just so much unknown. There was a huge knife sitting on the table, and I was just like, no, this is gonna be a ride. You gotta do what you gotta do to survive. The mattress had a huge blood stain on it. I had no soap, no toilet paper. That was the moment where I just felt less than a human.
There were times that you felt like, let me just end it.
Yeah. I didn't think I could get through what I needed to get through.
She said she decided not to commit suicide because she was afraid the Russian authorities would not release the body to the family. When she was finally released, she was forced to write a letter to Vladimir Putin. She said, they made me write this letter. It was in Russian. I had to ask for forgiveness and thanks for their so-called great leader. Didn't want to do it, but at the same time, I wanted to come home. And she played last year for the Phoenix Mercury. She's back again this year. The season begins May 14th. I've not seen the full interview, but that's the cliff notes on it, that she said that there was thoughts of suicide in the early part of her stay in Russia. All right, coming up, Chase Daniel with an analysis of Jaden Daniels, which I think is significant, especially the part about protecting himself. We'll get to that. Plus, Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network was on the Rich Eisen show yesterday with an explanation of what the hell the Giants did. They went into the draft and looked certain that they were going to take a quarterback if J.J. McCarthy fell to them at 5. He was there. They didn't take him, and they took a wide receiver. Garafolo's got a reason for that. It may make sense to you. It may not. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So next hour, we're going to play parts of an interview that was done the other night at the Economic Club of D.C. David Rubenstein, who bought the Orioles, and Cal Ripken was there, and they told some really good stories, and I think were really instructive on the state of baseball in this area, with the Nats and the Orioles coexisting in many ways. I think there's a lot of crossover of fans from my house. I live in Germantown. It's probably easier for me to get to Camden Yards. It's a great, great ballpark. The Nats Park is nice. I wouldn't say it's quite the level of the Orioles, but it's not too much of a step down. And I am a Nats fan. I love the Nats. Seeing them win the World Series was wonderful 5 years ago. So, yeah, I'm not going to tell you I'm a Orioles fan. My wife is. She grew up there. And, in fact, we're going to go to a game in the next week or two there. So, you know, there's that. But the fighting that had gone on during the Angelos days appears to be in the rearview mirror. And the big thing is, and they did not talk about this at this 1 hour interview that Rubenstein and Cal did at the club, was what happens with the Masson deal, because I think that's pivotal in the future of both teams, and more so the Nationals, because they don't have to keep fighting in court for money that they're due in the deal. And I think it's very likely that Masson is going to fold up, and that Ted's network, Monumental, will carry both the Orioles and the Nats, and there may be a conflict or two in there, but they could probably work that out with another channel, even with the Caps and the Wizards involved. And, you know, they both go deep into the playoffs. You know, it's a big overlap for baseball, but I think they can work that out. Anyway, I just saw this note in a story in the Times, and that's why I'm bringing up the baseball here, about the Nationals and the over-under for wins this year. I didn't realize it was this low. The Nationals over-under for the season, 65.5. which was third lowest in the National League. Well, yeah, I'm not saying it's a lock that they're going to win 66 games, but they're 15-15 in the early part of May. So, you're talking about them winning 50 games over the next, 4 months, May, June, July, August, September, 5 months? No. So I don't say count your money, but I thought the number would be higher off the way they finished up last year. But you got teams that are far worse than they are. Miami is 8-24. Colorado is 7-23. In the and then in the American League, the White Sox are the worst team, 6-25. So yeah, I mean, not time to count your money yet, but it's just I was really surprised that the number was that low, 665.5. So yesterday, Chase Daniel was on the Rich Eisen show. Tom Pelissero sitting in for him, and Chase Daniel, if you remember, was a really good quarterback at Missouri, but he's a shrimp. He is, and I can tell you this because I once interviewed him, and I'm 5'9", probably now closer to 5'8", and I was looking him in the eye. He's listed at 6 feet. He ain't 6 feet. But miraculously, he hung around the NFL for like 15 or 16 years. Didn't play very much. I think made 4 starts the whole time, but was in what they call now quarterback rooms throughout the league. So he's learned a lot about the quarterback position, even though he hasn't played it that much in the NFL. So I trust his eyes on this. And this was his analysis, as he told Tom Pelissero, of what he saw on tape from Jaden Daniels.
In my opinion, he was like right up there in my quarterback rankings with Caleb Williams, because what he does so well is he goes through progressions at a pace that I really have not seen an NFL quarterback coming out of college do in a really long time. And what does that mean? Hey, he understands how to get from the first to the second to the third. I've seen him, Tom, get to the fourth and fifth progressions in a college offense and throw touchdowns to the running back on a check down versus quarters coverage, where that's the only place to go with the ball. So he is a really bright mind, and I really do think his ceiling is higher than Kyler Murray in this offense. And that's why I love the fit. And that's why I think they were really sold on Jaden Daniels the entire time, was because of Cliff Kingsbury. It's not a really hard offense to learn, although Jaden's really smart. It's very just, hey, here's a half field read. Here's a half field read. Here is a full field progression. It's very quarterback friendly. And obviously they're going to use his legs. I think that's not being talked about enough. I watched a film the day before the NFL draft just to get a bearing on who he was as a player against Florida. He ran for 238 yards.
Yeah.
Like it is really, really crazy to see that. And he really is, though, a combination of both a pocket passer and a runner. I think that's what the Commanders really liked about him. The only thing, Tom, he's got to gain some weight. He's got to get his weight up. He looked really fragile in college. He took some massive hits. If he's going to be running that much, you cannot have that happen in the NFL.
That mashup that has been floating around social media of Jaden Daniels taking hits set to the Looney Tunes theme is one of the funniest things that I saw the entire pre-draft process. But it is true. He takes some absolutely hellacious hits. He was like $170 in his days at Arizona State. He was up to like 190, I want to say, in the spring 2 years ago. So he has put on like 20 pounds. The question is, he's this narrow frame type of dude. Yeah. If you keep doing that, regardless how much weight you put on, if you take those types of hits at the NFL level, whether you're Anthony Richardson, who's 6'5", and 240, or Cam Newton, who's 6'5", like eventually that stuff's going to add up on your body.
Totally. And that's the biggest thing that NFL quarterbacks and NFL coaches and NFL trainers talk about. The best ability is availability. And that's what he has to understand. Get down, know when the journey's over. It sounds cliche, and guess what? It is. But it still withstands the test of time. You can't take hits and be able to play 17, maybe 18 games like Roger Goodell said is coming.
Yeah, and I've said that a number of times over the last few days. We're going to have an 18-game schedule. Not in 2024, maybe not in 2025, but I would be shocked if we don't have it by 2026, because there's just so much money on the table for the NFL. They keep making these side deals with Peacock and Amazon, and they add more games, and they've blown past these ideas of, you can't schedule a game then. I mean, it used to be you couldn't schedule a game on Friday night because you wanted to protect the high school kids. Don't have NFL up against high school. Well, they just said, the heck with that. So there's going to be a game in Brazil on the opening weekend. We're going to have Thursday night football. We're going to have a Friday night game. and then we're going to have the full Megillah on Sunday, plus the Monday night game, and then we roll right into Thursday. And so they need more software. They need more games, and when you have more games, you know, you got to keep your quarterbacks healthy. You can't have what the Ravens had in 2021 and 2022, where Lamar Jackson was unavailable for the last 5 games of the year. That defeats the whole purpose of these franchise quarterbacks. You know, you can get there, but if you're going out in the first round, that's no good. You may be able to accumulate a good enough record during the regular season before the star quarterback gets hurt to make the playoffs, but you're not going to be able to compete in the playoffs unless you have one of those guys. So, they want to make it safer. Can they? Who knows? I know that they now have approved these crazy-looking soft caps that you see in training camp. Those are going to be allowed in games this year. We'll see how many guys wear it. But Daniel's 100% right on his need to protect himself. The encouraging thing that he says he saw on tape, and this is what really drives quarterbacks out of the league, is they lock in on one receiver. And once you do that, you become an interception machine. The way he goes through his progressions, as Daniel said, very, very impressive that he does them so quickly. That's a big key to playing quarterback is your primary's covered, where's your secondary? Okay, where's your check down receiver? But you got to do it in like a second and a half. It's not easy. And a lot of guys fail at doing that. The other thing I would say about the analysis of trying to extend plays and running plays, realize how bad the defense was at LSU, that he really had to keep doing that. His only chance to win was to do what he did. So you got a defensive coach now in Dan Quinn, the offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury. That's developing. That's part of his deal. But when you have a defensive head coach, he's got to be able to say to both Kingsbury and to his quarterback, yeah, make plays, but if it's not there, punt. We got your back. Our defense, the defense that I'm going to build here as a head coach, I got a defensive coordinator, but I'm going to build a team that has a defense good enough so that you can live for another day if something's not there. So I like the setup now. You know, defensive coaches have not been in demand in the NFL, but you know, if you've got an offensive coordinator in Kingsbury who's been a head coach before, maybe the circumstances line up perfectly, and everything looks good on paper in May. Let's see what happens when they get back out on the field. Adam Peters yesterday that was kind of an in-house interview, just basically running down all the draft picks, and he's not going to say we blew it on this one or we got our fingers crossed. He's going to be obviously positive on everybody he talks about. But the one that I thought I would play for you is the one where he talked about Mike Sansestrill, who's the cornerback that they got from Michigan. And he doesn't mention it here, but with the speed he has and the ability he has to catch, because remember he started as a wide receiver, I wonder if he could be a kick returner. And the kicking game has dramatically changed this year, the way they've set up the kickoff rules. I don't know if he would return punts, but you might want him as a kickoff return guy. So that's an interesting thing. But also, remember, this team under Jack Del Rio had a terrible time with turnovers. They weren't getting turnovers. So they rolled the dice on Emmanuel Forbes last year, who had set a record at Mississippi State by 6 pick sixes. Well, he's not ready to play cornerback in the NFL. We'll see if he can extend his career, but it was not a good rookie year for him. What Peters says here about Sansestrill is very important, because creating turnovers is a big part of success in the NFL, and he says he has a unique ability to create those.
He's going to be a nickel. We call it a star. Yeah. And Mikey's another player that fits the mold we're looking for in a commander. Just an incredible dude, incredible work ethic, incredible character, and then a really, really good player as well. A guy who started at receiver and switched over to nickel, and he was one of the best nickels. Probably he was the best nickel in college football. He had 6 picks, and that's what we covet, is somebody who can take the ball away. Joe Witt talks about catching the flash of the ball, which means you don't really see it. You don't have eyes on the ball the whole time, but when you turn your head, it's going to flash at you. You got to be able to catch it, take the ball away, and he could do that better than anybody. He probably had the best hands on the whole Michigan team, not just the defense. We saw him at his pro day, and he was incredible running routes. So from that perspective, he takes the ball away, but then also he's a dog, and he's tough as nails. He'll come up and be fit in the run game. That's what you need in a nickel. So we're thrilled to get him.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that really stood out. I mean, I watch college football. I watch teams. I watch Maryland. I know some of the players. Obviously, I watched the Michigan-Ohio State game, as everybody did. But he really stood out. Number 0. He's not going to wear that here, but he looks like a baller, as they say, as the kids say. Sanderstrell looks like a baller, and Nick Saban said, he said, pound for pound, he might be the best player in the draft. He's not the biggest. He's 5'9". Is he the fastest? Maybe not, but he's not far behind. But the way he plays football is very impressive, and I think he's going to be great to watch this year. By the way, on the power rankings, as many good grades as the Commanders got on the draft and also what they did in free agency, Nate Davis, who does this kind of analysis in USA Today, has his new power rankings out. And Washington has moved up with what they did, but not much. He's still got them ranked number 26, ahead of only New Orleans, Tennessee, Denver, New England, the Giants, and Carolina, who's going to stink. Top 5, Kansas City, San Francisco, Baltimore, Detroit, Green Bay. No surprises there. But they only move up one spot from last year in the power rankings, from 27 to 26. You know, I mean, what does it mean in May? Nothing. But I think it's an example of, while we get overly excited about things that happen here, when you look at it in a global perspective, as Davis does, yeah, they're better, but they're not much better. And we have a circumstance where there's going to be a new quarterback, and while you know what you're going to get with Marcus Mariota, who may be okay, Jayden Daniels is totally unknown. If he's great, then obviously things change incredibly. I mean, look at the top teams: Kansas City, Mahomes, San Francisco, Baltimore, Detroit, Green Bay. They all have quarterbacks. That's a big deal. All right, last thing on this football roundup here, we got Mike Garafolo, who works for the NFL Network, was on yesterday on the Rich Eisen show and talking to Tom Pelissero about the draft that the Giants had, because it was considered to be a lock that if J.J. McCarthy fell down to the Giants at number 5, they would take him. They did not. They passed on him. He went number 10 to the Minnesota Vikings, and Giants apparently made a pitch to move up. Adam Peters was on another station today. He didn't say which team had made this offer, but he said they got what he called one solid offer to move up to number 2. That may have been the Giants. I don't think you make a trade in a division if you do that. But looks like they're going to stick with Daniel Jones, and this is Garafolo explaining the logic behind that.
I know they went into this draft process saying, all right, if we can land a guy who we think is going to be a franchise-changing quarterback, we're going to land that guy. If not, we're going to try to surround Daniel Jones, who they have had confidence in, that his rehab will be on track and is on track and will be set for week 1 of the NFL season, at which point he will be the starter. Drew Lock is there, and Drew Lock they have confidence in, and they certainly made a strong move to bring him in as a free agent. During the rehab process, Drew Lock's going to push Daniel Jones. And who knows? After week 1, if Daniel Jones is not playing well, that's up to Daniel Jones, basically. But at this point, they feel like they're confident in him. And they've got a potential game-breaking presence in Malik Neighbors. They have not had that since Odell. I know the comparisons are there because of the LSU thing. But this is the kind of piece that they need to get to the point where we thought maybe Darren Waller was going to be the element that was going to open up this offense and lead them to be something you got to worry about. Instead, week 1, they come out and they're more conservative than they were the year before, which I still don't quite understand how we got to that point. So this is the state of the Giants. Is Malik Neighbors needs to be the guy that unlocks Daniel Jones and unlocks this offense right now.
We had Jarvis Landry on the show yesterday, former LSU Tiger like Malik Neighbors. I had him give his Mount Rushmore of LSU receivers. He put Malik Neighbors on that list. And he was calling back to Dwayne Bowe and guys from yesteryear. And he said, based on not just what he sees, but the sources that he still has in Baton Rouge, he said, this guy is going to be legit. The question really is about Daniel Jones. And you're there, Mike. I'm sure just you run into Giants fans. You've got family members, friends, whatever. What's the environment around Daniel Jones? In other words, are we going to get into training camp and this is going to be nonstop? When is Daniel Jones going to be out of the lineup? Or are people, listen, they're pot committed for $35 million this year. Are people willing to give this a chance with Daniel Jones?
I believe that most Giants fans, just gauging the reaction leading up to the draft, most Giants fans wanted Neighbors, which leads to them showing some confidence in Daniel Jones. They haven't seen the full Daniel Jones since he's been here. I mean, John Mara said it himself best when they hired Brian Dable, or was it Joe Shane? It was one of those press conferences. John Mara spoke to the side and said, we've done everything we possibly can to screw this guy up. Changing head coaches, changing offensive coordinators, haven't had an offensive line, haven't had weapons around him. So we're still at that point with Daniel Jones. Add the ACL recovery on top of that, and you still have a huge question at the quarterback position that needs to be answered by him playing well and by him coming out and showing that he could be the guy that if you need him to throw 40 to 45 times a game, if you need him to throw for 4,000 yards on a year, that he can be that guy. If you need him to come back at the end of the game and lead you to a comeback victory and throw you to a win, like we saw in his first action when he played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers years ago and he led a comeback victory, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. This is why they picked him 6th overall. He's sort of Eli Jr. Doesn't look like he has a pulse, and then all of a sudden at the key point in the game, he's making the plays that you need him to make to win the game. That's what we need to see. Now you've got Malik Neighbors added to it. You've got them pretty much doubling down. And because this is not the regime that drafted him. That was the other thing. It was like, okay, well, when it's not the regime that drafts you, you come in, it's a quarterback that hasn't blown you away. They can't wait to get their next guy. This would have been the opening for the Giants and the new regime to do that. They did not do that. They had the chance to take J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, even Bo Nix if they wanted to. They would have interest in those quarterbacks later in the draft. They didn't have them rated that high. They said, you know what, we're going to ride with Daniel Jones, and they are.
That's Mike Garafolo, NFL Network. You wonder, though, about Daniel Jones, who's going to come back knowing that the team was trying to get his replacement. And then they went, all right, forget it. We'll just get him a wide receiver. Well, wide receiver has to have a quarterback who can get him the ball and get him the ball at the right spot and, things like that. And we don't have any real chemistry between Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors, So it seems to have put, I think, Daniel Jones in an odd position. He got the contract extension, went into last year, had a year that was more typical of his first 4 years in the league rather than the year that he had leading up to the contract. So, he's there because they couldn't get his replacement. I don't know if that's a great situation, which maybe is one of the reasons that you see Nate Davis having the Giants ranked number 31. Yeah, the only team he says in the power rankings is worse than the Giants is Carolina, and Carolina's going to be bad for a long time. David Tepper, I don't know if you caught this the other day, but there's a small little roadside restaurant in the Carolina area, and like a lot of them, they have a billboard sign out front. Sometimes it's to advertise, specials, 2 pies for $10 or something like that. And on the board, it said, "This year, let the GM and the coach pick the player," because last year Tepper seemed to be behind the move to move up to number 1, the trade that they made with the Bears, which so far has been a disaster, and his meddling ways and the drink that he threw on a fan and just the way he's conducted himself. As long as he's the owner, you can be pretty much assured they're going to stink. They're in Snyderland right now with him. They're not coming out of it until he sells the team. And you can say, well, he could learn over a period. Yeah, Snyder used to say that every 5 years. Oh, I've learned a lot. I don't do what I used to do. Nah, you don't get a tiger to change his stripes. So that thing is going to be a mess. But the Giants, to be right down there, 31. The teams just ahead of them: New England, Denver, Tennessee, New Orleans, and then Washington at number 26. But I think they have a chance, depending on the quarterback, to look a lot better than that. Coming up, where have you gone, Jason Worth? not where you think. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Next hour, insight into how the Orioles are being run. David Rubenstein and Cal Ripken appeared the other night at the Economic Club of D.C., and I'm going to play some of their comments. I think you will be very, very impressed with what they said, and the old war between the Orioles and the Nationals, not on the field but off the field, that may finally be over. Some smart people now running the Orioles. So this morning I pick up the paper, as I always do. Yes, I actually get the real live newspaper. It's now like $400 a year, but okay. I like it. I like to have the paper in my hand. Yes, I know it's available online. You get everything on. Okay, I got that. But the paper, I like it. So front of the sports section is a picture of a horse. And being at this time of year, the spring, I reminded of a story that Kevin Greavy told me. Kevin Greavy, great guy, played on the Bullets championship team in 1978. He was a first-round draft pick out of Kentucky in 1975 after they lost the championship to UCLA. And he said, look, I thought one of the great perks of winning an NBA championship was to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So when we beat the Sonics in Game 7 in Seattle, that I figured by the time the magazine came out, we would be on the cover. They were not. I think it was Alydar. Alydar had won the Belmont the same week, and so they put the horse on the cover. You know, Secretariat had only won 5 years earlier, but that they felt like it was a better cover with a horse than it was with an NBA championship team. Now, those were the kind of the dark days of the NBA. The games were played on tape delay, and there was a lot of feeling among people that this league was filled with drug addicts, and it wasn't worth your time. There was even the racial component of, oh, yeah, most of the teams are black. Why are we going to go out and see them? All that kind of nonsense. And so they didn't really get their due, and it really wasn't until 1979 when Bird and Magic came in that the NBA went to another level. It was also helped by a very smart commissioner, David Stern, who made stars the focal point of the NBA and so forth. But whenever I see a picture of a horse on the cover of either a newspaper or a magazine, I think of that Kevin Greavy story and how disappointed he was that his Bullets championship was not recognized with a Sports Illustrated cover. But this is about a horse that's part owned by Jason Worth. And Jason Worth was considered to be, I don't know if the strategy worked out exactly the way they thought, but the Nationals is not a new team, but a team that was new to Washington and had come from Montreal, and with new ownership under the Lerners, they wanted to prove that they were willing to spend money. So Jason Worth was the first big free agent that they signed. He'd been on a championship team with the Phillies, and they signed him to a 7-year, $126 million contract. And he managed to hang on until after the 2017 season when he was released, and that was the end of his baseball career. But he gave the franchise some great moments, including that 13-pitch at bat in the 2012 Division Series against St. Louis, where he hit the walk-off home run, which extended it another day. They unfortunately blew a 6-1 lead and lost in that series. But, he helped to usher in an era of winning in Washington. And, what do guys in baseball lifers as he was, 15 years, what do they do after their playing days are over? In most cases, they stay in baseball in some capacity, whether they're a coach or whether they move into a front office or broadcasting or whatever it was. No, he's now in the horse racing business. And he said he got interested in it when he actually was still playing, and he was watching. He saw some guys gathered around the TV in the middle of the day, and they're watching races. And so one thing leads to another, and he gets involved in a group. And he's got Dornoch, D-O-R-N-O-C-H, who's at 20-1 in the Kentucky Derby this weekend. And, people who start to invest in horses, to get to a Kentucky Derby in like your second year of ownership is hard to imagine. It even says that in the story here that, I know this is not supposed to happen to me this soon, but it is happening. So he's getting to get some of the thrills he got when he was a player, a competitive, feel, and watching his horse race, a 3-year-old colt, will start in the first gate, 20-1. And, who knows? We'll see what happens come race time on Saturday. But, kind of a cool story about Jason Worth and his post-baseball career. And then we have this, Deion Sanders and his son Shedeur engaging in something they should not be engaging in. And it's one thing if the son does it. Shedeur is going to be a senior quarterback at Colorado this year. One of the players who left the team, Xavier Smith, told The Athletic that Deion never even tried to get to know me. He was destroying our guys' confidence and belief in themselves. So Shedeur saw that, and he posted to Twitter, "Bro had to be very mild at best," insinuating that Smith was only an average player. Okay, those things happen. Players go back and forth with each other on a variety of things. But then things started to escalate. Colorado receiver Caleb Mathis posted a video of himself torching Smith in a practice, which Smith's Austin Peay teammate Jaheim Ward noted that Mathis had just 38 receiving yards last season. That tweet led to Ward's career stats at the FCS school, 36 tackles over the last 3 years. And then Deion weighed in, stating, "Lord Jesus," above a screenshot of Ward's stats. And then when the Shedeur thing went back and forth another time, and somebody pointed out that Colorado was 4-8 last year, Deion said about his son, "He'll be a top 5 pick. Where's yo son going? LOL, LOL. I got time today. LOL, LOL." First of all, Deion, stay above that. That's a player spat. That's a thing that's going on Twitter. Yes, you want to defend your son. You want to defend your program. Understand all that. But, at some point, this Deion hype machine has to have results. The school's happy with him because he brought them lots of attention. He took over a football team that had won 1 game the year before, and he won 4 this past season. Well, he won 3 of them at the start of the year. They were 3-0. So they only won 1 game the rest of the year. And he makes comments like, get me now, because you're not, this is as bad as I'm going to be. And yeah. Well, let's see. Let's see what happens now. Because at some point, the big brouhaha about coming in and doing social media posts and showing you kicking all the players out of the team and I'm bringing my own luggage and it's Louis Vuitton. I mean, he's smart and he's funny, but over the most important thing that a football coach has to do is to win, and he has not done that yet. When they were 3-0, it's like, oh, Deion must be the best coach in America. Where's he going to coach next in the NFL? Well, let's see. And I did hear Mel Kiper say this, that he believes Shedeur will be the number 1 pick of the NFL draft this upcoming year. Well, let's see. Let's see if that happens. I think he's got to win more than 4 games. And if they win more than 4 games, will they be even good enough to get to a bowl? You got to win 6. If they are great this year, if they make a big step up and they're in the playoff, which is now 12 teams, okay, now we're talking about something different. But right now, there's a lot of sizzle going on here, but there's not a lot of stake. And people tend to look past the record of 4 wins. I don't. I think that's very significant here. And to have a coach engaging in social media wars with players, I don't think that's a good look. Deion, he's about Deion, and he's made it work for him personally. Building his fortune with commercials and the way he was able to play 2 sports and juggle things and all that, and getting into coaching, and he did it the right way. He went to an HBCU school, proved himself there. But again, if you're a 4-win team, let's not strut around like you've won something big already. Let's start winning before we really start to evaluate how great Coach Sanders is, Coach Prime. Coming up next hour, David Rubenstein, Cal Ripken on the new state of the Orioles. It's the Andy Poland Show, ESPN 630. It was 25 years ago today that John Elway announced his retirement from the Denver Broncos. There are ways to leave a game, and there are ways to leave a game. And he left it about as well as you could leave it. He had a lot of frustration in the early part of his career, Wasn't that great first few years? If you look at the numbers, he was an interception machine. When he started to get rolling, he got rolling, but he would go to Super Bowls and get his butt kicked. Giants did it to him. The Redskins did it to him. The 49ers really did it to him, 55-10. And he was getting late in the game, and it was like, you're going to wind up this Hall of Fame career and not win a Super Bowl? And then he won 2 on the way out the door and was the MVP of the last one, and then was able to walk away like that. Peyton Manning also walked away a winner, not back-to-back, but that is the way to go. That's the way to go. So we'll look back later this hour as to how he left the game and the comments he made at his news conference 25 years ago today. Some baseball thoughts here. Talked about the Nats, the over-under for wins this year, 65.5. They've already got 15. They're looking good. A rare 1-0 win last night. We'll see if they can win the series this afternoon in Texas. That'll be a 2:30 game. And then I'm thinking about salaries, too. And I've 2 years ago was disappointed when they traded away Juan Soto because I thought, that's a guy who seemingly wants to be here. And, yeah, okay, he turned down your $440 million, but you got him under control for another couple of years. Maybe let it run into free agency, hope that he's better, you build a better team around him. Nope, they gave up. They traded him away. Now he's with the Yankees. He's probably going to re-sign with the Yankees. And he's hitting .325. He had a home run the other night against the Orioles. Didn't homer last night, but did have a hit. And I look at what he's probably going to get off the Ohtani deal. His number is probably going to go over the 500 mark, I would think. I would think he would get $500 million in a contract, and the Yankees will want to hold on to him. And you hope that, in his case, for his sake, I know you probably maybe hate the Yankees, but I found Soto to be a really good and engaging person here and gave us a lot of thrills and was key in them winning the World Series in 2019. But once he gets that contract, then you got to look across the country and see Mike Trout. And Mike Trout has played in exactly 3 postseason games his entire career. He's been hurt constantly, and now he's hurt again. He's a $426 million contract. He's got like $280 million still left on it, and he's going to miss significant time this year, maybe all of the rest of this season, because he's due for knee surgery. And this was Tony and Mike last night on PTI on what this means.
There's talk it may not cost Trout the rest of this season, but that depends on what the doctors find. Trout's 32 years old. He's missed considerable time the last 3 seasons. Wilbon, what is the word you would use to describe Trout's career to this point?
The word would be, Is that a word? That's what it would be. There just is no good news for Mike Trout. I mean, he loses Ohtani in the offseason. Your boy Anthony Rendon is on the injured list, the DL, as we used to call it, for like the 15th year in a row. And he's got no tag team partners anymore when it looked like they were going to have, a 27 Yankee-style lineup when all these guys were sort of put together, all 3 of them. And Tony, it just, you see the comparisons. And he's got this, number that compares positively to Ruth, and this one that compares positively to Ted Williams, and this one to Mays, and this one to Aaron. And it's just like he's so star-crossed. And more star-crossed than, say, my hero, Ernie Banks, who didn't play in the postseason either, won 2 MVPs and never had a postseason for baseball fans nationally to identify with. Well, in this modern age where 94 teams get to the postseason and Trout can't even qualify that way, it's just, it's just what do you say to him?
You mentioned the exact word that I would use. It's star-crossed. Trout is not just a great player. He's an all-time great player, really. Don't talk to me about playoff games because Ted Williams only played in 7 playoff games in his entire career. He's a 3-time MVP. He's a 9-time Silver Slugger already. He's an 11-time All-Star already. His career numbers, about 299, 378 home runs, 954 RBI. Only Giancarlo Stanton of active players has more home runs. Trout right now is leading the American League in home runs this year. Only Jose Altuve and Freddie Freeman have higher batting averages among active players, and they don't have the power Trout has. You know what, Mike? It feels like when Ohtani left and left him behind, it feels like he was sentenced to prison with the Angels, that this is Alcatraz. And if this was the NBA, he'd have been out of there years ago.
Alcatraz, that kind of contract. Okay, but it's just a symbol of what could be for teams that lay out these contracts. I mean, look at Anthony Rendon, a complete disaster with the Angels. Got a $300 million contract off the World Series that took place here. Just absolutely remarkable. You know who's going to have to face this decision not too far down the road on these big contracts is David Rubenstein. And Rubenstein bought the Baltimore Orioles from the Angelos family. And unlike Angelos, he actually does interviews. So he and Cal Ripken showed up at the Economic Club of D.C. the other night and were interviewed by Philip D. Piccaccio, I believe. He founded Octagon. And Rubenstein has done these type of interviews himself. He had Josh Harris and Mitch Rales last year after they brought the Commanders. And you watch about an hour. You can watch it on YouTube. It's very, very interesting to somebody like me who interviews people, who likes to watch people being interviewed, especially smart people. And this was Rubenstein on why he bought the Orioles, what was behind that, because he'd been approached about it before. And he said, actually, 20 years ago, Cal Ripken came in with another investor hoping to convince Rubenstein to join the group to buy the O's. Didn't happen then, but it's happened now.
Cal did come to my office one time with a banker friend of his, remember? Mm-hmm. And who's from Baltimore, went to my high school. And he suggested this, and I just said, how this is ridiculous, I'm not going to buy the team, and so forth. But, you never can predict where life's going to take you, so it worked out.
So how did you construct your ownership group? Have you known everyone for a long time, and how early in the process did you speak to them about the opportunity?
It was complicated because originally John Angelos had approached me last summer in Nantucket about buying a minority stake. And I thought about it, but then I said maybe I'd be interested in buying a minority stake with the path to control at some point. And then ultimately he decided to accelerate the path to control. So I realized then I probably needed to put in more money than I was prepared to put in myself. So I talked to somebody who had once talked to me about his interest in buying a team. That's Mike Arrighetti, who's a very successful financial investor in New York. And he has an incredible knowledge of baseball. And I've been playing fantasy baseball for the same team for 27 years, so he knows something about baseball more than I did. And then I wanted to assemble a group of people that were committed to the Orioles, committed to Baltimore. Either they usually lived in Baltimore, had grown up in Baltimore, and it was a diverse group. It wasn't just a bunch of people who looked like me who thought they were great baseball players when they were little. So I tried to put together a good group, and I think we have a very good group. And I'm pretty happy with where we are right now. But I would say I've met a number of people in the process whose obsession with the Orioles is far greater than anything I could have imagined. I won't mention his name, but there's one person who came into the group, and I did an interview with him at his firm. It's a large financial service firm in New York, and he was interviewing me for something. And afterwards, he said, "I heard you might buy the Orioles someday." I said, "Well, I don't think it'll probably happen." He said, "Well, if you do, call me. I'd be interested." So I called him and thought he might put a modest amount of money. He put a gigantic amount in, but he told me he had not missed seeing an Orioles game for 20 years. So how did he do this? Because he's a financial service guy. He subscribes to MLB.com or something, and he watches every game. He has 4 children, and his 4 children watch every game. And this guy knows every statistic. I can't imagine. But there are many people I've run into who are so obsessed with both baseball and the Orioles that I just realized how little I knew about baseball, because my knowledge kind of ended around the time I was in Little League. I was in a small Little League in Baltimore. It was a Jewish Little League. And, I thought, if you were good in a Jewish Little League, the Orioles would scout you. But it turns out I was wrong. They said that they would scout you for potential owners, not potential players. So,
yeah, I often say that. We don't play, we own. But, I think he's similar to Josh Harris in this regard. Now, Harris owns other teams. He owns the Sixers. He owns the Devils. But he also looks at his hometown, Washington, D.C., in kind of the same way that Rubenstein looks at Baltimore, that he wants to give something back. Now, the skeptic might say, well, look, he's buying a team. What do you pay? $1.7 billion for the Orioles. In 10 years, they might be worth $5 billion. And the $6 billion that Harris laid out to buy the Washington team, that may be worth $15 billion in 10 years. Who knows? Yes, these are great investments. But there's also the realization here that Rubenstein is in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. Harris is in his late 50s. They don't need this. They're doing this to actually help out their hometowns. Yeah, they're going to benefit financially, but they got more money than they'll ever need or know what to do with. And, we'll wind up giving it away to charities and to their heirs and things like that. It's not that. And this is Rubenstein, I think, with the same motivation that was the motivation of Harris here. And I wonder about this too. Let's say that there wasn't the Dan Snyder disaster of the last 25 years, and the ownership was pretty good, but they wanted to sell, and it was a good organization on strong footing. They were in a good stadium. I don't know if Harris would have gotten involved in the bidding. I don't think he saw it as a financial opportunity as much as an opportunity to help D.C., where he grew up. And Rubenstein is cut from the same cloth here, where he looks at Baltimore, where he grew up, and thinks he can help out the city with the purchase of this team.
I've tried, as some of you know, to try to give back to the country a bit, and did a lot of that in Washington. But I realized later that I got a good public school education in Baltimore. My parents were born there. They were raised there. They were married there. They raised me there. I was born there. I grew up there. My parents are buried in Baltimore. No doubt I'll be buried in Baltimore as well. And I wanted to do more for Baltimore than I had done. And I thought maybe I could try to give back a little bit by helping to energize the team. And there was an opportunity when the sale came along to maybe help energize the team and maybe energize the city and give back to Baltimore, which had been very good. It gave me a great public school education. I didn't have the money to go to a private school or anything like that. And so I viewed it as a way to give back to Baltimore, and hopefully over the period of time that I'm involved, hopefully for quite some time, I'll be able to help the team in some ways.
I buy that. If you want to be skeptical of that, these billionaires are just printing money. They just want. I'm not sure it's all that with him. He'll benefit, but his business is making money. That's what he does, and he wants a business here that's going to make money. He doesn't want to lose a lot of money on the Orioles, and the television deals will help them for sure. But the attendance has to be beefed up as well, and he'll get to that. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. But yes, Cal Ripken was there as well, and he told a number of stories, and we'll play some of them coming up in about 15 minutes or so. But this is an Edward Bennett Williams story. Now, if you don't know the history of the ownership of the Baltimore Orioles, after Jack Kent Cooke sold the Lakers, the Kings, and the Forum to pay for what was then the most expensive divorce in U.S. history. It was like $150 million. He needed the cash to pay off his ex-wife, and so he sold all that and then reassumed control of the Redskins. Now, he was always the primary owner of the Redskins, but in those days, the NFL wouldn't let you run an NFL team and run other sports franchises. We don't have that anymore, obviously, with Josh Harris owning the 76ers and the Devils, so that has long gone away. But in those days, that was the case. So then Edward Bennett Williams took his share, and he bought the Baltimore Orioles from Eli Jacobs. Jacobs' family had owned them since they had come from St. Louis in 1954, and then Edward Bennett Williams passed away, and the team was sold, and eventually it wound up in the hands of Peter Angelos. So this was Cal telling a story of Edward Bennett Williams' days as the owner of the Orioles, including when they won the World Series in 1983, and giving a kind of a perspective on winning and losing in baseball.
He owned the club when we won the World Series in 1983. We had 2 8-game losing streaks in the middle of that season. And he was a little frustrated with the losing streak. So he came in and gave us a speech. And he came in, and it was like we were members of the jury. He was a trial attorney, and he was walking around with his hands behind his back and talking, and he made all the sense in the world. But But the gist of his speech was contest living. We perform in front of the public, all the time. And he said, you got to remember, in your world, you could lose 60 times a year and still win 102 games. And he said, I can't make a living if I lose that much. Nobody really got it. But I bring that up is you can't live and die on wins and losses each day. You're going to kill yourself if we're worried about losing. Because last year they won 101 games, which means they lost 61. So it was the 100 wins of the season is great. They won the American League East. They didn't do so well in the playoffs, but maybe that's an adjustment that when you go to the games, you can't win all of the games.
Well, look, when I was chairman of the board at Duke University, I used to send hand signals in to Coach K, say, this is what you should do. And he won a championship. So maybe I'll just give a little hand signals to the manager. Maybe that's what I should do. We'll see.
He is not going to be that kind of an owner, which is a good thing. Angelos, in the early days, was Rubenstein, too smart for that, obviously. Coming up, it was 25 years ago today that John Elway retired and had maybe the greatest exit in the history of sports. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
All right, May 2nd. That will always be an historic day in the life of John Elway because 41 years ago today, the Baltimore Colts blinked. May 2nd, 1983, Elway had been drafted a couple of weeks earlier, the number one pick of the draft. Ernie Accorsi, who was the GM of the Colts at the time, said, this is the best quarterback in the draft. I don't care if he doesn't want to play here. We'll eventually work it out. We're taking him number one. We're not going to settle for number two, even though there were other Hall of Fame quarterbacks in that draft, Jim Kelly and Dan Marino. He wanted John Elway. And he took Elway, and Elway and his dad made it clear that they weren't going to play in Baltimore. And they made statements like, oh, it's a little too cold. And it wasn't that. It was that his father was familiar with Frank Kush, who was the coach of the Colts. He didn't like Frank Kush, didn't want his son to be coached by Frank Kush, and said, we're not going to have you play there. Elway had signed a contract to play baseball in the minor leagues for the Yankees. Now, I've been told that he was like the third or fourth best baseball player at Stanford. He wasn't major league quality. And he was playing in the minors. Steinbrenner liked the publicity, and that was his game of chicken. Like, well, if you're not going to trade my rights, I'm not going to play football, and I'm going to play baseball. He wasn't Bo Jackson. He wasn't Deion Sanders. And so time went on, and Ernie Accorsi said, let's sit down, let's work this out, let's figure out some things. And unbeknownst to Accorsi, the owner of the team, Bob Irsay, not Jim Irsay, the son, but Bob Irsay, on his own, made a deal to trade Elway to the Denver Broncos for a future first-round pick, tackle Chris Hinton, who was good, not great, and Mark Herman, who was just adequate. And that is one of the worst trades ever made because John Elway went on to become one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. But it did not start out, swimmingly for him. In his first 3 years with Denver, he threw 37 touchdown passes and 52 interceptions. I mean, there were questions about Elway, believe it or not. By year 4, when he was 26 years old, things began to click, and he became so good that he was taking Denver teams of inferior talent to Super Bowls just on how good he was, particularly at the end of games. He had 31 comebacks during his career and 40 game-winning drives. And that's when the pressure's on, when it counts the most, he was at his best as time went on. But, they got clobbered in his first Super Bowl, which was after the 86 season, by the Giants. They go back the next year against the Redskins. They get clobbered again as you had that incredible performance by Doug Williams in the second quarter when he threw 4 touchdown passes. They go back again after the either 89 or 90 season, and they lost to San Francisco 52-10, which I think stands as the biggest blowout in the history of the Super Bowl. And it's like, oh man, it's he's going to finish his career with some great numbers and great performances, but he's never going to win a Super Bowl. And he said late in his career, with like 2 years to go, he said, well, if I don't win a Super Bowl, my career is still going to be complete. I still will feel like I had a great career. Well, he did win in his second to last year with the Denver Broncos. They won after the 1997 season, so this was January of 1998 when they beat the Green Bay Packers. And the signature play for Elway in that game was not a touchdown pass. He threw 300 regular season touchdown passes during his career, but it was a run where he was trying to get to a first down, and he got hit so hard he helicoptered. In other words, he got hit in the side, and he spun around, and he fell forward for the first down. That's the signature play of his career. As great as he was as a passer, and he had a rocket arm, that was the signature play, and that helped cement the Super Bowl where they knock off the Green Bay Packers. He was not, though, the MVP of that game. Terrell Davis, who was an incredible story, he had to come out because he couldn't see during the game because of migraines, comes back in, helps to lead them to the Super Bowl. He's the MVP. The following year, they go back, and they're even better during their regular season. I think they won like their first 13 games, 13-0, and then they lost 2 down the stretch. And then get to the Super Bowl, and they play an inferior Falcons team. They're not as good. They happen to get lucky in the championship game against Minnesota, where Gary Anderson, who had missed a field goal all year, missed a chip shot, went to overtime, and the Falcons won with the dirty bird and the whole thing. And then they show up, and they got squashed by Elway and the Broncos. And Elway was the Super Bowl MVP in that game. So he played a little bit in the Pro Bowl, but that was, it was just exhibition. But in the last meaningful game of his career, he walks away as a 2-time back-to-back Super Bowl champion and the Super Bowl MVP. There's not really a better way to go out. So on this day, on May 2nd, exactly 16 years after the Baltimore Colts blinked and traded him to the Denver Broncos, where he went on to a Hall of Fame career, playing in 5 Super Bowls, winning the last 2 of them. This was John Elway trying to keep a stiff upper lip as he said goodbye.
This is hard. There's an over-under in the locker room from what I heard last night on how many times I'm going to cry. So I'm trying to bet on the under, but it's been great, and it was tough. It was a tough decision, but it wasn't. And I really don't look at it as retirement. I look at it as graduation. We all graduate from high school. We graduate from college. I'm just graduating from pro football. Any other questions?
And he walked away. He walks up there like all full of bravado. I told my teammates I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. And then he's talking about it. It's one thing to think about it. I guess this is another to actually talk about it. And he goes, "Oh, wow, I'm going to have to leave football." This is another. Now, he composed himself. He walks back to the microphone and he says this.
It's time. It's time for me to move on. I can't do it physically anymore. And that's really hard for me to say. Ooh.
Now you know why I only spent 2 minutes up there.
I know it. Are there any other questions? Oh, yeah, the line. I don't know what the line is, but I've lost my bet.
No question about it. And this was the last part where he, finally gets himself together, although it's, he's still blubbering a little bit. But he's at the point here where he's made peace in his mind that he's walking away from football after this incredible 16-year NFL career.
Physically, and it's really hard for me to admit, but I couldn't do it anymore. And, as I said last year, I never want to stop competing. I just can't compete at the level in this game that I want to compete at anymore. And that's really bottom line what it came down to. Secondly, it came down to family, and they've been great for 16 years since the kids have been born. And the family life is focused around me and football. And it's time that it focuses around them.
He's not the first, wasn't the first, and won't be the last to say he's walking away to spend more time with his family. it doesn't usually work as well for the athlete or the coach as he thinks it will. John Madden left the Raiders after the 1979 season. He coached for 10 years. He's only 42 years old. And he said, I'm going to spend more time with my family. Well, after he finishes coaching, he sees his family. He's got 2 sons. They're off doing their own thing. They're teenagers. They're playing high school football, and they got other things in their life that they have to do. And his wife has a job, and he's sitting in his house all alone. And he goes, I guess my family learned to live without me. Kind of the same way with Elway. He was very appreciative of his wife at this news conference. They had met at Stanford. I believe she was a swimmer, and he was the football star. And they had this, storybook marriage and all that. That broke up too. And the kids, they grew up. The son, I think, played a little bit of college football. Didn't turn out to be the next John Elway and all that. But you always hear athletes or coaches, I'm going to spend more time with my family. Doesn't quite work out that way. But May 2nd will always be a significant day in the life of John Elway, first being traded to the Broncos 41 years ago and then retiring 25 years ago today. All right, that wraps it for me. Mike Callow is in next for Tony, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.